Welcome to the Maine Science Podcast. I'm Kate Dickerson. Today's episode is a conversation I had with Diane Rowland, who is Dean of the College of Natural Sciences, Forestry, and Agriculture, and Director of the Maine Agriculture and Forest Experiment Station at the University of Maine. Diane's research focused on crops and plants, and we talked about her work in that field, how she has gone back and forth from New Mexico to Maine, with some stops in between, and what her role as Dean allows her to do in the realm of moving science forward. I learned a lot, and I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Diana, welcome to the Maine Science Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here. I feel like we've met before. You went to Orono High School and then made your way to the University of New Mexico, so that culture shock alone is pretty fascinating to me. But I'm curious how you made your way in the world of crops and plants and what inspired that. What was it like to go from Orono to New Mexico? And then we'll get you back to Maine after that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for having me. This is really exciting. Always love to talk about science, love to talk about my pathway in science, which I used to like to tell my students when I taught that I am the example of all of the things you should not do to go through a path on science. So I guess first my path from Orono to New Mexico, actually it's a path from New Mexico to Orono. So I originated my family, most of my family, and my husband as well. We were originally from New Mexico. My dad was a scientist. And so that brings up the whole idea of access to science. He was a research entomologist with the Forest Service. His specialty was spiders. He loved spiders. So I grew up my entire life with my sister with spiders throughout everything we did. And he was transferred from New Mexico to Maine to work on spruce budworm. So this was in the 70s with the massive outbreak. They brought together, mobilized a huge team of scientists within the University of Maine, outside the university, state agencies, federal agencies, brought in folks to really work on spruce budworm in a novel, very wide way. So this was when I was 10. And so we packed up from Albuquerque, New Mexico, moved all the way across the country to Maine. At the time, I was the only one who was so excited to go, and everybody else was less excited. As it turns out, everybody stayed except for me. I left when I was 18. And so this has been a wonderful, wonderful journey to come back.
I love kind of the boomerang effect you've got going on here. New Mexico, Maine, New Mexico, Maine. So did you find your love of plants from your dad? It sounds to me like you were surrounded by science, obviously, but also a very particular kind of science with entomology and forestry. I actually think spruce budworm, now that I think about it, is a real triumph in many ways of figuring out what's happening and how do we address it so that everything isn't devastated. I think the argument could probably be made that Maine remains the most forested state in the country because of how they address that, which is yet another example of a science success story that we do not tell often enough. So I'm just curious, was it that? Was it more like, yeah, I kind of like this stuff, but let's see what college has to offer? I certainly went to college with a clear intent that I did not keep. So
no, in fact, I guess I tell people I rebelled after high school. So I thought I was going to do anything else but science. And so it took me a long time to get an undergrad degree. I wandered around the country, tried probably just about every major, came one class away from a math major, and then finally said, I love science. I have to do this. So turned around and got a biology degree. And I think it was, again, talking about having that almost woven into my entire life, right? Because of the benefit I had from having a dad that worked in science. It was just a part of the cloth for me. And, even though I tried to deny it for a while, it was just there. Plants was something different. And maybe that was a way to be sort of a little bit separate from dad. The other thing is I had difficulty with collecting specimens. He was a taxonomist, and so we did a lot of collections. And I had difficulty with that just personally, no philosophical issues. It was just, I had difficulty with that. So plants were much easier. That was an easier organism.
I can appreciate that. That's kind of how I would feel, I think. So after you got your PhD, did you do the whole academic route? like a postdoc, tenure track, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
So sort of. From Maine, then I went back to New Mexico in the same department that my dad got his PhD. I ended up getting my PhD in that department, and my daughter is currently in that department at the University of New Mexico pursuing her PhD. So again, it's part of the cloth, I guess. So I didn't do a master's, I guess. So I did sort of the undergrad. It took me a while. Once I knew what I wanted to do, then I went straight into a PhD program and got a PhD without a master's. So that's certainly something that can be done. And then after that, I went and did a part-time postdoc for a while I had my daughter. So managed motherhood in that way. And then after that was basically, I did the postdoc for about 2.5 years, I think, part-time and then full-time. And then it was just a matter of, oh my goodness, I need to get a job. And so began applying to everything. And just by luck, I got my first interview with USDA Agricultural Research Service. And that's how I ended up in crops.
So I have 2 comments to make, or 2 questions, I guess. You did your undergrad at New Mexico as well, right? And then stayed on. I think it's interesting that you specifically pointed out you didn't get a master's degree, because I think that's one of the things that people don't realize. Even within different sciences, there's different so-called correct ways to do it, right? So like Jessica Leahy, when I talked to her, she talked about a master's and then did the PhD. My son is actually doing a PhD program. It's straight from undergrad, and that's in math, right? Like there's just all these different ways to do it. I find it super interesting. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say you and I are about the same age-ish, and that you had the opportunity to do a part-time postdoc is not something that is often afforded scientists in general and women in particular. So was that a negotiation that you had to do? So when I had my son, I had a boss who knew what it was like, and I worked part-time after I had him, and that was not the intention. My intent was, I'm going to pound this out. It didn't work that way. So I realized it's a little divergent, but it's really interesting. I think this is a thing that women have struggled with, moms have struggled with for a long time, and now it's become a much larger parental issue. And it feels like we're moving this battleship. So I'm just curious how that went for you.
I was very lucky. Had a wonderful postdoc advisor, Nancy Johnson, and met her at UNM and followed her to Flagstaff to Northern Arizona University. She was a mom. She knew what it was like, and she fully supported me, including sending me to some project meetings with my daughter, with my husband while I was nursing. I mean, yeah, I definitely was very lucky to have an advisor like that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I love academics and academicians. I don't want to be one of you guys, but it can be a really difficult road if you want to try to do any type of balance. So it helps to have allies who get it while you're doing it.
I get that question a lot, right? How do you balance? That's a common question, right? For rising scholars. How do you balance? And I think that I would be remiss if I didn't say that I also had a very supportive partner, and that made a huge difference.
Yeah. And what I have found is the balance question, like I said, is coming from everybody. It's not just moms who are trying to figure it out. It's everybody is kind of taken a step back and said, what am I doing here? So it needs to be a whole family focus. But it's really interesting because the sacrifices we ask people to make isn't necessarily conducive to making things advance as fast as they could.
True, absolutely. Or to be sustainable. And we made the decision, whose career are we following?
Yeah, we had that too. And it became really easy to pick. We're going where the physics jobs are, because my work was in the environment. And I was like, we have messed that up everywhere. I can do that from anywhere. So it was like, you go where the physics jobs are. All right. I'm assuming, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you don't get to do a lot of crop research right now because you're in administration. I just want a little tidbit of what it is with crops that you liked. I know you got it with USDA, but what was it? What did you get to do, and kind of what excited you about it?
Several things, I think. First of all, to have a job was awesome. As a professional scientist, it was great. My dad worked for the government, so I kind of knew what that was about. And so going into this government research job was really cool. I was plant physiologist, so always interested in the function of plants. And so to have the question related to, now you have a system that's managed, in agriculture. What does that do to the plants? How do you breed for plants, which was a whole other topic and concept. But probably more than anything, it was the crop that I worked on, which was peanut. And peanut is the coolest plant in the entire world. It is just awesome. So that helped.
All right. I know I said I wasn't going to make you talk about this much, but I have not had a lot of people I've spoken to who have worked for a government of any level. I've had a local person, a state person, and now you're federal. I think it's really easy to forget that research happens in government. So what does that look like? What is the focus of government research and what is it trying to do from that perspective?
So I can certainly say for ARS, and I imagine for the other agencies as well, you have to show impact. That is the key. And so it has to be relevant research. I think that's where I learned the balance between how you can achieve really basic research with applications. And doing that connection is really hard. But I think working for state, federal research agencies, that's what you got to do. And so that was a really important skill to learn. The other piece to it is you are focused on research. You're not teaching, you're not doing other things. And then for ARS in particular, that impact had to involve the stakeholder connection. So my first job was in South Georgia. And so it was really important that I met with peanut farmers, worked with them, sometimes hand in hand in fields. And that was super exciting to me because that human connection, understanding why a scientific question I had was relevant or not, or a solution that I maybe developed, whether it was actually going to work in their operations or not, having that connection with making research really relevant was such a great feeling.
That sounds in some ways really similar, minus the education piece, to what public universities in general and land-grant universities in particular have to do, right? I mean, inadvertently, pretty fantastic training for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So that leads into now you're a dean, which always just, that's like, ooh, the dean. So what does it mean to be the dean at the University of Maine? The college that you have is, to my impression, wildly diverse. I find it fascinating as someone who worked with resource economics folks for a while when I was on campus, and I know biology's in there and forestry. It's a wild mix. So I'm going to stop talking and let you talk about, number one, general, and number two, what it's like at UMaine in particular.
So nursing, social work is in there too. Okay. So here's the distilled version. We have the toolbox in one place that is needed to solve all the wicked problems of society. And when I applied for this job and looked at this college, that's exactly what excited me. There are many institutions, even across the world, that are trying to put organizations together that have that, what's called transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, whatever the buzzword is. It's getting all of those disparate disciplines together to work together to solve really tough problems. And so that was quite an appeal at that point in my career path. I'd been doing research for 20 years. It was definitely about wanting to make an impact, wanting to be relevant. So those themes have kind of stayed throughout. And so moving as a dean, to me, it seemed like the perfect combination of serving the faculty while taking a broader view and helping facilitate their own impact. And that's definitely the experience it's been here.
So I realize we probably got a little bit inside baseball there. I think some people don't realize the difference between a college and a university and all of that. So if you could explain why UMaine is set up in this university thing with colleges, as opposed to when someone thinks of Bates College, which is a different setup kind of thing.
Yeah, very good point. And I think part of it has to do with the land grant flavor too. And I don't know how much to get into that, but in general, a university is a set of colleges, and those colleges are set up what are called academic units. And those are schools or departments that focus in certain topics. And the reason why they do that is, again, to sort of help the operations of the university be efficient. So, for example, if you had however many schools and departments, individually, it would be very difficult to sort of run the organization. So colleges are a way in which you can increase efficiencies, you can increase those connections. And it's very historical. So some of it is sort of the structure that higher ed has used for ages and ages.
So when you mentioned nursing and social work as well, and then you can solve all the wicked problems and everybody's trying to do the research that you've already got, it's really easy for people to stay in their academic silo. And I totally appreciate why, having watched from afar and been mesmerized by it. So having a college where people are interacting with each other is great, but how do you facilitate that in a way so that it becomes synergistic as opposed to just another burden where the biology person has to go talk to a forestry person and then maybe they bring in healthcare because that's a critical issue in some ways. How do you do that? And I realize if you have an exact answer, you would be far ahead of most people. So just how do you facilitate that is kind of what I'm asking.
Oh, yeah, that's the $1 million question. That's what we've been working on since I've gotten here. The first step we took was just recognizing each other, right? So coming in, I heard a lot of people go, that school is in our college? Or, oh, I didn't know you were in our college. So that's been simple things from having an open office once a week where I just make it open. People come in, it's a small group, but there's been a lot of, oh, I hadn't met you before kind of deal. We had an event called NSFA Unlocked. So that's our college. And we did 3-minute rapid fire talks from each of the schools and departments about what they did. And that was, again, a way to sort of introduce everybody to one another. We have lots of work in that area. But one of the things that is helping that is that a lot of the external funding, the grants and things that people apply for, they're requiring that. So, way back, it used to be you could apply for a grant as a single investigator, a single researcher. You can't do that anymore. And they don't want you to have all your biology colleagues on the grant just alone. They want you to have engineers and they want you to have nurses on there. And so the funding is driving part of that as well.
And do you find, as you're doing that, because of course, none of us just get to do one thing that we focus on, are you also trying to foster similar, not as in-depth, but similar relationships with the other colleges so that it fosters a creativity that you wouldn't have otherwise, right? And I can say that because I'm in my own little world, but I think there's pretty strong evidence that that's true. But it's hard, right? Because this is the part that's been fascinating to watch is different colleges even have different ways that they talk within themselves so that when they then join up, it's like, oh, you do it that way? It's fascinating as an outside observer to watch.
It is. It's true. And we're one entity, but we're not quite. I think, again, one of the remarkable opportunities coming to UMaine, they were in the process of hiring many new deans. And so we've come together sort of as this new team, some existing deans, but primarily almost all new. And we have held together really well. It's extremely collaborative. So those opportunities are increasing day by day in ways that we interact and develop programs and opportunities together. And again, it goes back some to that structure that the university has, which makes some of that difficult. But I think every day you start to see that become less and less.
All right. So now I want to circle back to why it feels like I know you, because we had a whole exchange last March when I was trying to rope you into doing something for the festival when we partnered with Penobscot Theater Company and their production of Queen. So we had a short but really interesting email conversation about access to higher education. So that was one of the themes in this play that the theater produced, and something that I've thought about more once my kids were old enough to go to school. Our kids are lucky they've got a guy in the industry, so to speak, right? And even then, some of it was a struggle. The deal I made with my kids was they have to deal with all academic stuff, all extra, but I will do the financial aid. And that is not trivial, right? And I remember thinking, how does someone do this if they don't even know where to start? I could really get on a soapbox about this, but I won't. But it was revelatory to me because, like a lot of people who go to college, there were family expectations that I would. And I don't mean like it was forced upon us. It was just like, well, that's what you do. I know the exchanges we had, you talked that you've been thinking about this for a long time. I know it's a critical factor for Maine in particular. There are a lot of first-generation college students at every level. And then there are also, because it is so difficult, a lot of people haven't finished their degree for a bunch of different reasons, but not least of which it is a different culture. And how do we make that work for everyone? So I would love to hear your take on that. I would love to know if you've learned things from your previous work, both in Florida and just as a government employee, interacting with academics and seeing what they did, and then what you're trying to do to make it more attainable here.
This is great. And I'm really happy to continue this conversation. And it's been maybe a series of revelations for myself. I definitely took my dad for granted. So the fact that he edited my dissertation, that was just like, okay, that's something, right? That, no, everybody must be able to do that, right? It wasn't really until my daughter started her journey into grad school that I realized that's where the advantages are, right? Where you know all those little pieces. Oh, you need to make sure you write this in the essay, or you should definitely reach out to so-and-so. It's that networking piece and just the background knowledge, which honestly makes the difference, maybe not between entering into the realm of higher ed, but really succeeding in the realm of higher ed. And so it is a definite equity issue. And so we have in higher ed so focused on the academic pieces, we forget how crucial and key and missing some of those other support structures, networking, whatever you want to call them. They're sort of the unknowns, and we don't provide those. We aren't careful to provide those.
It's kind of the culture of the system that if you're in it, you don't realize that it's its own thing. I remember having conversations with theater folks and realizing that they would use language that I understood the words, but I didn't understand what it meant as a culture. And that's how academics feels to me, and college, right? It's that piece of it. So realizing that you're only one person, albeit one who's a dean, so you may have some say in this. Are there ways that you are trying to help structure the culture of your college so that that becomes easier once kids get there, and also getting kids there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of this work started in Florida. I had gone through Leadership Institute for Women in Higher Education called HERS. Coming back, I realized that that was great for me as a faculty member, but women grad students needed that sort of networking and skill set. And so it helped start a program there at UF. And then coming here, I think the relevance really is mentorship. And particularly for sort of the fragile state that the current students are coming out of, right? What they've experienced. It's not hand-holding. It's a personal connection, which really matters. So our college does a great job of making that personal connection with incoming students, whether it's questions about housing, questions about academics. I think the other key piece is mentorship in a career path. And that's one of the things we really want to start to implement. So we tend to recruit students into a college, and they don't care what a college is. They want to know what careers are available. So we've started rethinking about how we even message about coming to UMaine. Here are the career options that you have. I have a wonderful staff person in our academic support center that her question to students starts out, do you like the outdoors or the indoors? Do you like people or not so much? Okay, then you should go look in this particular area. I think that's beautiful. I think that's wonderful. And I think it's relevant to students. Then if we can start that path, how do we reach out to the professionals within those careers and link them to students? So for example, when I go speak to forestry industry people, they're super excited to get linked up with a student to help them mentor them through the industry and what are the opportunities. So that's what the students need. They don't need mentorship from academics in most cases. They need mentorship from those career pathway folks. And so that's one of the things that we're really trying to look at and have that mentorship all the way through the 4 years. So they get that inside information. They get that relevant skill set in how to be successful for their goals.
I love how you point out that it's not hand-holding, it's mentoring.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really easy to dismiss this idea that you're just hovering, or not dismiss it, but it can be seen as you're just hovering, you're helping these kids and they're not doing anything on their own. And that's not true, right? I think that's one of the cultural things, not just as a society, we have to figure out that, first of all, we've been telling kids for how long now with the pandemic, it's okay to ask for help. And then if they do, we're going to slam them for it. So, it's up to us to kind of follow through with that piece of it. Do you have some idea exactly what your program looks like? I assume this isn't like you came in and like, I can't believe nobody's doing anything. Like there's certainly something going on, right?
Yeah.
So are you kind of trying to figure out what's the best pieces that could apply across the college and then figuring out what needs to stay within this department because it's so specific? And then it would be great if there was a one size fits all, but I'm guessing there isn't.
Yeah. There's a kind of a general flavor that probably fits all about mentorship. And yes, some programs are doing this fantastically. Nursing, right? It's a requirement for their degree, right? But it's really this great model. They've now really invested in wellness for their students and bringing them through wellness all the way through. And it is a mentorship opportunity. So there are some wonderful models that we already have going on. But I think a good example is, say, forestry, where the ending part of the degree, you're definitely required to do an internship or a capstone, right, with an industry member. So in speaking to our lead of the School of Forestry, how can we bring students in from day one as freshmen, sort of prepare them with a skill set, a professional skill set that, again, we've assumed maybe everybody got at home or whatever. So we need to stop that assumption. So what are some interview skills? What are good work habits? That sort of thing, maybe for the first semester, and then connect them with a mentor within the industry. And that mentor then helps them, hey, you want to get a summer job? Here are some opportunities your first summer. And then during the sophomore year, hey, let's do an externship where you follow me for a day and you can really see what my job is about. And that carries itself all the way through the time here at UMaine.
I'm totally switching gears here on you. Is there anything about doing research on a regular basis that you miss, that you can't do right now?
Oh, yeah. So the whole reason I got into science is you get to ask really cool, awesome questions. And so I don't get to do that on a daily basis. I get to ask different types of questions. They're not science focused. So it's okay. And I think that definitely came from my dad. And in fact, coming back here, I've gotten to learn things about his own research that I would never have known had I not come back. So people will come up and go, oh, I knew your dad. And you know what? He did this type of experiment related to spiders. So those are stories I never would have heard, but I can see how he was driven by those questions and that creativity in science. And I see that exactly in myself. And that's probably the biggest thing I miss.
Yeah, I feel like I missed a whole opportunity here to not let you have 20 minutes about peanuts, but we can circle back to that on another conversation because your whole face lit up. But I also was like, oh, there's so many other things I want to talk about. I'm just going to have to be a bad interviewer and let that one go. So I appreciate that. So following up that, what is surprising or one of the coolest things that you get to do now as dean and an administrator that you didn't necessarily see coming? And I realize I'm deeply aware that being in higher ed right now, coming through the pandemic with all of the stuff that came after that and the financial issues does not make for an incredibly joyful time every minute. I do understand that, but I also have a feeling there's got to be stuff that you're like, this is really great that I get to do this.
So personally, I guess I've had the most incredible learning experience probably of my entire life, right? When would I have envisioned myself getting even just a general understanding of social work or nursing or marine science, right? So as a scientist, that learning opportunity has just been amazing. And so that's a selfish thing. I would say the other key pieces are exactly what I was hoping when I can help a group that's researching something, if I can help them in any way, if I can help their paperwork move faster or connect students to a particular faculty member. That was the whole reason why I wanted to take this career change. And so when those things happen, those are just micro bursts of joy every day.
That's pretty great. All right, I'm going to put you on the spot because we've been talking about it a little bit and dancing around it. I would love to hear all of the different areas of science that are in your college that you have to cover. So just because, right, you said nursing, social work, forestry. I just think it would be really interesting for people to hear how all of these are under one roof, so to speak. And also for me personally, I like the idea of imagining, whoa, okay, yeah. I'll include a link in the show notes on that. If you can send me that, I'll do it as a PDF and get it on the website. It'll be really interesting. But I just think to imagine the crossover in the Venn diagram of different ways that these areas can overlap that you may not have thought of. So you don't even have to pick all of them. It's a lot.
I think probably the best example is, I'll use a case study, are ticks. So we, for example, have the microbiologists that can understand the genetic workings of the tick itself. We have the biologists that understand the organism's ecology. So, how does it work in its environment? Then we have the forestry folks who understand the habitat of that tick. We also have the wildlife biologists who understand the interactions of ticks and deer and ticks and turkeys, right? And then we have the nursing folks that understand the physical impacts of tick-borne diseases. And on top of that, we have social workers, which then can understand what is the impact of those new diseases in the community and what does that really have to do with health impacts within the community. So I venture to guess there's no other university that can do that.
I'm not taking that bet. I think you're right. I will also throw in resource economics and the economic impact. Well, maybe this isn't economic impact, but it seems to me there has to be coming up an impact on tourism and other things based on ticks and all of that. So,
or healthcare. With all of this human disease, what are the economic impacts to the healthcare costs? Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this has been a joy. I feel like I've kind of been all over the place with this, but I think that's partly because, as you just explained in that example, there are so many all over the places to go. But I also really appreciate what you're doing and what you're bringing to the table of trying to figure out how to advance things that UMaine already does really well, but how to bring in new people and make sure that that can continue. I think it will make the state stronger. I think it'll make the university stronger. And it'll make what you get to learn about all the better, because there'll be so many different viewpoints coming in that you can just kind of grab their knowledge and feel just a little bit smarter. That's how I feel when I get to do this. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Maine Science Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on your podcast platform of choice. And please leave a rating and review. It will help more people find us and help spread the word about some of the remarkable people doing science in Maine. The Maine Science Podcast is recorded at Discovery Studios at the Maine Discovery Museum in Bangor, Maine. The Maine Science Podcast is executive produced and hosted by me, Kate Dickerson, and edited and produced by Scott Loiselle. The Discover Maine theme was composed and performed by Nick Parker.